What is happening, Boot Junkies? Mike Delgadio here, back with another video on home studio setup for voiceover. And I got a couple of dynamic mics in the booth today. Both of these are on loan to me. So I want to make sure I say thank you to everybody who's loaning me mics. This one, we'll start here. This is the Rode Procaster. And this one comes on loan to me from my friend Dan, who is a fellow podcaster, and you might know his podcast. I've been on his podcast a couple of times as a voice actor. Dan Foytik from The Wicked Library, from the Lift podcast. Go check out those podcasts. Good horror story podcast type thing and stuff. And an occasional actor for him. And he loaned me his Rode Procaster dynamic microphone. Thanks, Dan. And this one is the Lewitt MTP 550 DM. That's a many-word microphone. A lot of words to describe this handheld dynamic microphone. This one comes on loan to me from the good folks at Lewitt. They lent me a whole bunch of microphones. So do I have to mark this as sponsored content? I don't know, because I got to send them back. So because they sent me like a whole big box full of many microphones, and I got to send them all. Right? As of the making of this video, I got to send them all back. I guess I'll still mark it as sponsored content. I don't know what to do, but we're going to talk to it. You know how I do these, where I don't make a ton of judgment on them and say, go buy or don't buy or anything like that. Anyway, let's talk about what we got in the booth. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lewitt. I'm really super grateful that you loaned these microphones to me. These are both dynamic. I should stop leaning on this. These are both dynamic microphones. And there's a pretty significant different price point between these two microphones. So I thought it would be a good comparison. I wanted to put other microphones in the booth. I wanted to put my Shure SM58. It's not here. It's out on loan. I wanted to put a bunch of stuff in here, but these are the two that I have. And I feel like these would be too good. These could be primary podcasting mics. These could be your guest mics. So if you really, if you had like $700 to spend on equipment, you could get like a Shure SM7B for yourself, and then you could get, one of the less expensive microphones as your guest microphone that's, being used less. Maybe it's replaceable, whatever. You have a couple of different choices. So I thought I would give you two different angles at a less expensive dynamic microphone in case you wanted to use it. Now the Lewitt, I'm going to call it the 550 because MTP 550 DM is too many words for my mouth. So this one is also like really a stage microphone. So it is meant to be handheld. You can pull it out, and the idea here is you can hold it in your hand, and hopefully you can't hear a lot of handling noise. One of the big tests for a handheld microphone is, does it sound a lot? Now, you'd hear my ring. You should probably hear my ring clicking through it, but generally the handling noise. So you see singers, and they're tapping their finger as they go like that. You want to make sure that you don't have much in the way of handling noise. Now, the Procaster, really this is sort of your mid-range level dynamic mic from Rode. You saw one of my other videos, that was the Broadcaster. This is the Procaster, and then they have one called the Podcaster, which is a little bit less expensive. I haven't used that one yet. Hopefully somebody will loan me one at some point. But this is the Procaster. So this one says it doesn't have much in the way of handling noise, but really this is not a microphone that you would handhold for most of the time. I suppose you could, but really this is supposed to be, in a stand, in a rack, in a studio. This one can also be on stage. So one of the advantages that they say for the Lewitt is that it's good, got good feedback, rejection, and so forth. But for our purposes, for voiceover, we're really just interested in the sound. Now, both of these, no buttons, no switches, no nothing. They don't turn on, they don't turn off, they don't require phantom power. I have the gain set on my preamp the same for both, and I will say that both of these microphones are fairly gain hungry. I've got the gain turned about 95% of the way up on my preamp, so on my Audient ID22, and still the signal's pretty low. In post, I don't do this, I never do this, but because the signal's really light and I don't want this video to be just silent, I'm going to boost them up, probably 5 or 6 dB something like that. Maybe I'll take a screen capture of whatever my final setting is in Reaper, so that I am boosting it. So I don't. If I had a preamp with more gain, I would do it. Or if I had 2 cloud lifters, that's normally what I would use in this situation. But I like you to just hear the microphones themselves. They have somewhat similar specifications. They are both cardioid microphones, meaning that they're sensitive from the front and not from the back. So if you set these up like this, like that, I don't even know if you heard that. If you set them up like that, let me just put this back together. If you put them back to back, what that allows you to do is that allows you to, say, interview a guest. So like, let's say if this was your primary microphone and this was your secondary microphone, you would get a fair bit of rejection from one voice in the other unless you were getting sound reflecting off the back here. Because they're dynamics, you can get right up on both of these microphones. Now, I will say this Procaster, I believe this is an aftermarket pop filter. I'm using it exactly the way Dan lent it to me, so I don't know if this is standard. I haven't seen that this is standard. I believe this is aftermarket. If anybody knows what this thing is called, there's no marking on it. I've seen these a lot on the like the Electro Voice, but I don't know if this one. And I should have asked Dan beforehand, but I don't know. If I can find out what this is, I'll link to it or let you know. I don't know about this pop filter. The clown nose that's on the Lewitt is the one that came with the Lewitt. It just, come on. It just slides right off. But it does have an interesting, a nice profile, and it does seem to be pretty good at rejecting plosives, just with the metal mesh filter. But I'll put the clown nose on it, just so that we have an apples to. Well, I'll leave it off because it's going to make too much noise. So, no clown nose. Frequency response. They have a very similar frequency response, it's sort of a typical one for a dynamic microphone. This one is, I have these up on screen here, 75 hertz to 18 kilohertz. And this one is 60 hertz to 16 kilohertz. So maybe the slightest bit better bass reproduction and maybe slightly higher. Way up in the practically beyond audible range treble. I will say that I don't think these share a very similar sound. As I was listening to them, I don't know if it's the Procaster, but this microphone, I think it sounded a little tubby. Is that the right word for it? There's a boominess in the mid range that I think is a little bit funky. I don't know if it's the EQ curve of this microphone, what they have, but as I get right up onto it, it felt a little tubby. Whereas the Lewitt for me sounds a little bit more natural. Now they're both presence boosted microphone, and I think the Rode has more presence boost to it, so that upper mid range, that low treble, does seem to be a little bit brighter on this microphone than on the Lewitt. But I do find that the Lewitt is a smoother sounding overall microphone. And I don't think that there's a huge difference in improvement for the Procaster over the Lewitt, considering there's a pretty significant price difference. When I looked, $120 for the Lewitt, and what is it, about $220 for the Procaster? So this is really targeted to go up against something like a Shure SM58. And I think that this has a really super crystal clear sound for a handheld dynamic microphone. I was really surprised at how clear this was, because I really expected it to sound veiled. A lot of times the handheld dynamic microphones can sound really veiled. But for the frequency response and the price, super clear. They both allow you to get right up on them, so I don't really notice a very significant proximity effect. So you can get right up on these microphones and get right up on them, and you don't get bassier. So you can get closer and work the microphone without it getting boomier or bassier or have a pronounced proximity effect. It means that you won't necessarily be able to get up on that mic and just chew on it and be like, "You're listening to Smooth Jazz on 92.7, whatever it is. You don't necessarily get that bassiness to it, but you do get an overall smoothness. So the only thing that should happen as I move away is a change in the volume and not necessarily the change in the timbre of my voice. I shouldn't sound bassier or anything like that. That's called the proximity effect. You either want the proximity or you don't. You can always take it away largely via EQ after the fact, because there's many mics that don't have switches. Sometimes they'll have they'll have high-pass filter switches that can take away the proximity effect. Neither of these seem to really demonstrate a proximity effect. So that's what I got for you today. The Lewitt MTP 550 DM handheld cardioid condenser microphone loaned to me from the good folks at Lewitt. The Rode Procaster. That flows out. The Rode Procaster on loan to me from Dan from the Wicked Library. Go listen to the Wicked Library. That's all I have for you today. Now, go get yourself a dynamic microphone. Get in your bedroom or your studio or out on stage. Record something amazing. Great. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks.